I didn't cry when my father died, not because I didn't love him. I did. God knows I did. But when you watch a man slowly disappear behind his own eyes day after day, memory after memory, it's like mourning in slow motion. By the time his chest stopped rising, the grief had already made a home inside me, cold, heavy, familiar. The hospice nurse said he passed peacefully. I was the only one there. My brother David hadn't shown up that day, not surprising. He always found a way to be absent when it mattered most. Still, I texted him. I told him Dad was gone. No reply. Just the usual silence wrapped in excuses. I remember the room smelled like rubbing alcohol and dying flowers. The kind people bring when they don't know what to say. The TV was on mute, some rerun sitcom casting light on the pale walls. Outside, the wind pressed against the window like it wanted in. And in the dim corner of that sterile room, something shifted in me. Something hard. Something unspoken, because I knew a secret. 2 nights before he passed, my father was lucid. Just for a moment. Long enough to squeeze my hand and whisper something I'll never forget. "There's a clause," he said, his voice dry and rusted from the morphine. "In the will, page 6, handwritten addendum. David doesn't know. He can't, you. Make sure, son, promise me." I promised. I didn't even know what the clause said. I just knew he wanted me to protect something, maybe the family, maybe the truth, maybe just what was left of his dignity. But I said yes, because when your dying father asks you for one final favor, you don't negotiate. The funeral was quiet, private, just the way he would have wanted. A few neighbors, old friends in thick coats, and family that hadn't spoken in years, but suddenly remembered how to cry. David gave a speech, of course polished, poised, all surface. I stood behind him, watching his hands. They didn't shake. Mine wouldn't stop. Afterwards, he pulled me aside in the parking lot, the December wind cutting through his tailored coat like it wasn't even there. He said, "We should go over the will together. You know, just to make sure everything's smooth." I nodded. "Sure." What I wanted to say was, "I know what you did," but I didn't. Not yet. It started the day after the funeral. I drove to Dad's old law office, well, what was left of it. The firm had dissolved years ago, but Harold, his former partner, still kept a box of files in storage. Said he held onto it out of respect. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, until I found the envelope. It was thick, sealed in wax, with my name scrawled across the front in that familiar, all-caps handwriting that looked more like blueprint drafting than penmanship. Inside, there was a single sheet of yellow legal paper. At the top, addendum to last will and testament. And below that, a single line. If David touches what's not his before the ink is dry, he forfeits everything, including what was. I read it 3 times. It hit me like a whisper with teeth. Dad knew. Somehow he knew. He knew David would try to take more than what was left to him. He knew greed would outrun grief. And he trusted me to guard the gate. I didn't tell anyone, not yet, because something in me needed to see it first. Needed to know for sure that my brother was the man my father feared he'd become, and not the boy I once followed through cornfields, chasing fireflies, laughing until our lungs ached. But it didn't take long. 3 days after the funeral, the house was empty. Not the kind of empty you feel lonely, echoing, cold. I mean physically emptied. Jewelry gone, safe cracked, old coins missing. Even Dad's war medals, ripped from the velvet shadow box nailed to the wall. David didn't even bother to hide it. Or maybe he thought I'd look the other way, like I always had. But this time I didn't, because there was a clause. And now it was mine to uphold. He thought he got away with it. But the old man left a final chess move, and I was holding the last piece. David was always charming. Not in a warm way, more like a mirror. He gave you back what you wanted to see, just long enough to get what he needed. As kids, he could talk our way out of anything: detention, fights, even that time he crashed Dad's old Dodge into the neighbor's fence. I lied for him then, swore it was my fault. I guess I thought that's what brothers did. But standing in the doorway of our father's study, staring at the gaping hole where the safe used to be, all I could think about was how many times I'd mistaken David's cunning for care. The desk drawers were open, files shuffled, personal letters discarded like trash. Even the antique fountain pen Dad kept in a glass case was missing. That pen was older than both of us. It had belonged to our grandfather. I remember once, as kids, David tried to take it and Dad slapped his hand so hard it left a red print. For an hour, "Some things are earned," Dad said, "not taken." But David never liked waiting. I sat down on the floor, right where the safe had been, the indent in the carpet still fresh. The room smelled like dust and cedarwood and something faintly bitter, maybe aftershave, maybe old regrets. I closed. My eyes let the silence settle, and I remembered something, a flash barely a second long. A week before Dad passed, I'd stopped by the house to bring him some soup. He wasn't talking much by then, drifting in and out, but I caught David walking out of the study, wiping his hands with a handkerchief. He looked startled to see me. Forced a smile. "Hey," he said, like he hadn't just stolen time. "Didn't think you were coming today." Now it made sense. He wasn't visiting. He was scouting. I felt my jaw tighten, heat crawling up my neck, but I didn't call him, didn't storm over or demand answers. I just picked up my phone, opened the note app, and started writing everything down. Dates, times, items missing. I took photos of the room, the empty frames, the scratch marks near where the safe was bolted. I wasn't sure what I was building, but I knew it needed to start somewhere. The next morning, I went to the lawyer's office. The official reading of the will wasn't for another week, but I had to know how airtight Dad's clause really was. The receptionist recognized me, sympathy in her eyes, like she thought I was just another grieving son tying up loose ends. Mr. Keller, our family's attorney, was a man in his 60s with hair too neat to be accidental. He wore grief like a necktie, appropriate, but not heavy. "I assume you're here about the estate," he said, motioning for me to sit. I handed him the addendum. His eyes flicked back and forth, reading carefully. His lips parted slightly. Then he leaned back. "Well," he said, exhaling, "your father always did like contingency plans, so it's valid?" I asked. He nodded. "It's valid. It was witnessed and notarized. The clause is enforceable. And if someone violates it..." He gave me a measured look. "Then, that individual forfeits all entitlements listed in the original will. Everything would revert to the remaining heir." Me. I left the office with a calm I didn't trust. The city was cold, sidewalks slick with melting snow, and as I walked back to my car, I felt like I was holding something fragile in my chest like glassware. I wasn't sure I wanted to protect or shatter. That night, I went to my father's grave. I don't know why. Maybe to feel close to him. Maybe to whisper into the dark that I hadn't forgotten. The cemetery was silent, the sky hanging low with clouds like bruises. I stood there, hands in my pockets, and said, "You were right about him." The wind rustled the dead leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a car door slammed. I turned and saw headlights pull into the lot. David's car. He didn't see me at first. Just walked straight to the grave, holding a bouquet like it was some kind of penance. I watched him kneel, his shoulders stiff. No tears, just a performance for an audience that wasn't there. Then, something odd. He pulled something from his coat pocket, a key. Small, silver. He kissed it like a relic and whispered something I couldn't hear. When he turned and walked away, I waited until his car was gone. Then I walked up to the grave and found the spot he'd been kneeling. The key was gone, but in the freshly turned soil, there was a mark, a small indentation. Something had been buried there, or taken. I stood in that spot for a long time, the cold eating through my coat. Trying to piece together a puzzle I hadn't realized had more than one layer. David hadn't just robbed our father. He was still digging, still hiding something, and whatever it was bigger than I thought. I couldn't sleep that night, not because of the cold air creeping under the door, or the faint creak of the house settling in the dark. It was something else. A quiet drumbeat beneath my skin. A feeling I'd learned to trust. When your instincts whisper before your mind can speak, something didn't add up. I kept replaying the moment at the cemetery, David kissing that key, the way he glanced around like a thief returning to the scene. Whatever he took, it wasn't sentimental. My brother doesn't do sentiment. Everything he touches has value, leverage, or legacy. Sometimes all three. The next morning, I dug through Dad's old journals. He used to keep spiral-bound notebooks filled with numbers, quotes, half-thoughts, little fragments of the man he was. One in particular caught my eye. The spine was worn, cover nearly torn off. Inside, in pencil, was a single entry that stopped me cold. If he tries to take it, it won't be from the house. It'll be from the land. He always knew where I buried it. But he never earned the map. The land. The cabin. A flood of childhood. Memories hit me like a wave I wasn't ready for. Every summer, Dad took us up to the mountains in Vermont. Just us in the woods. The air smelled like pine sap and old stone. He'd spend hours chopping wood, making repairs, or just sitting in silence on the porch while David and I chased frogs near the creek. One summer, maybe I was 10, we found him digging something behind the cabin. Said it was just for fun. But he was never the type to dig without purpose. Now, I wondered if that moment had meant more than I realized. That night, I dreamed of fire, the cabin burning. David watching from a distance, eyes glowing, mouth curled in satisfaction. I woke up soaked in sweat, heart pounding, unsure what was memory and what was fear. The next day, I called him. No answer. I texted, "Need to talk. Something's off." Replied 2 hours later, "Busy. What now?" I stared at the message for a long time before typing. Dad had debts, maybe. "You think there was more to the estate?" He replied instantly. No, there wasn't. Don't go digging into things that don't matter anymore. That sentence hit me like a slap. He was nervous. David never got nervous. I started keeping notes. Everything he said, every strange glance, every time he mentioned Dad, it was with detachment, like the man had already faded from his life years before his body caught up. And then came the flashback, clear as a shard of glass buried in memory. It was 3 months before Dad went into hospice. I had stopped by unannounced, just to bring groceries. David was already there alone, upstairs, rummaging through old photo albums. He looked up, surprised. "Didn't expect you today." "What are you looking for?" "Nothing, just nostalgia." But something about the way he closed the book felt wrong. Too quick. Too guilty. Now, I remembered. There was a letter on the table that day. Dad had been writing again, even though his hands trembled and his vision had dimmed. I never saw what was inside. But I remember him looking up at David with eyes sharp and ancient, and saying, "If you want the key, you'll have to become a better man first." And David had laughed. Not the light kind, the cruel kind. Like Dad was just a ghost already. Now that memory sat in my chest like a stone. There had always been something buried. Not just on the land but between us. Something poisonous. Something unspoken. The next weekend, I drove up to the cabin. It hadn't changed much. The roof sagged, the screen door groaned, but the trees still leaned in like old sentinels. Snow blanketed the ground, soft and silent, muffling every step I took. I stood behind the cabin, near the old oak tree where I once carved my initials. The ground was frozen, but not untouched. There were shovel marks. Fresh. Someone had been here recently. I knelt, brushed the snow away, and saw something glinting beneath the dirt, a tiny sliver of metal. A lockbox corner. He had already found it. Or part of it. But if he had taken the box, why come back with a key? Unless it wasn't just a single hiding place. Unless there was more. Back inside. I checked under the floorboards. Dad used to stash whiskey there when Mom was alive. And sure enough, beneath one loose plank, I found a metal case the size of a cigar box. Inside, 3 things. A faded photo of the 3 of us, taken the last summer we were here, me, Dad, and David, standing in front of the fire pit. My brother's eyes looked dead even then. A thumb drive and a letter, folded neatly. Addressed to me. The paper smelled faintly of smoke and cedar. I unfolded it with shaking hands. If you're reading this, it means I was right about him. And you were strong enough to look deeper. What David took isn't just about greed. It's about blood, about legacy. And you deserve to know what was hidden and what you were protected from. My heart stuttered, because I realized then this wasn't about money, Dad. It was about something older. Something broken. Something that had been waiting to come undone for years. I didn't open the thumb drive right away. I sat with the letter in my lap for a long time, just staring at my father's handwriting. The way he still called me son, with weight in every letter. Like he'd written it, not just for me to read, but to feel. His words made the cold sting deeper somehow. What David took isn't just about greed. I whispered those words into the silence like they might answer themselves. By the time I got back to the city, it was already dark. I didn't go home. I drove to a 24-hour cafe with cracked booths and weak coffee and free Wi-Fi. The kind of place where people keep their heads down and their stories to themselves. I plugged in the drive. There were 3 files. No names, just dates. The first was a scanned document, an old hospital report. A birth certificate, but not mine. Not David's either. It was for a child named Elliot James Monroe. Born 1982. Father, Richard Monroe. Mother, deceased. Adopted sealed. My breath caught. Dad had never spoken of another child, but the year matched. Elliot would have been born just before Mom got sick. Just before David. The second file was a video. Grainy, timestamped 10 years ago. I pressed play. The screen flickered. Then came my father's voice, low, tired, unsentimental. If you're watching this, it means David found what wasn't his. Again, his face came into frame, older, worn. There are things I never told either of you, things I was too ashamed to say. But the truth has a way of surfacing, even when you bury it deep. He looked away, swallowed. David isn't my biological son. I froze. The booth around me seemed to dissolve. I raised him like my own, loved him, tried to teach him right. But he always had this edge, this hunger, not for approval, for control. Your mother knew. She forgave me. But it was never easy. He sighed. The sound of a man excavating himself. There were papers, bank accounts, a trust fund in Elliot's name that never reached him. David found out, years ago. He threatened to ruin us if I didn't rewrite the will. The camera shook. A pause. I gave him what he wanted. On paper, but I kept the clause and the key. Because I knew he'd come for more. I stopped the video. My hands were trembling. David wasn't my full brother. He was the child of another man. And he knew, all this time. The way he treated Dad. In those last years, it wasn't indifference, it was resentment. Calculated, quiet, and the worst part? He didn't want justice. He wanted revenge. I opened the third file. It was a scanned letter. From David, written to a lawyer I didn't recognize, as discussed. The funds from the Monroe Trust will be transferred once the safe is accessed. The original documents are in my possession. No interference is expected. My brother is weak. My jaw locked. My brother is weak. Those words landed like a blade, all those years. the deference. The way he made me feel like the shadow of a man. He hadn't just taken from Dad. He'd spent his whole life crafting a version of me that was small, uncertain, just obedient enough not to look behind the curtain. But now I had seen it. I wasn't going to confront him with rage. I was going to answer in silence. I printed the documents. I made copies. Safe deposit boxes. One with Keller, the family lawyer. One with a friend I trusted more than blood. I didn't tell them everything, just enough to protect the truth. Then I waited. I didn't tell David what I knew. Not yet, but I did start showing up more. At the estate meetings, at Dad's old properties, at the courthouse, reviewing land deeds and family records. And I let David see me. Let him wonder. Because when a man like him doesn't know what you know, fear becomes the loudest thing in his head. I started noticing him unravel. Small things. The way he tapped his fingers during meetings. The way his smile lingered a second too long. Like glue starting to melt. Then, one night, he showed up at my door. Unannounced. No smile this time. Just stood there, soaked in rain, eyes unreadable. "We need to talk," he said. I stepped aside, letting him in. The air between us was heavy like two tectonic plates preparing to shift. He sat down. Didn't touch the coffee I offered. "What do you want?" he asked finally. I looked him dead in the eye. "I want you to be honest." His lip curled slightly. "About what?" "You know what." Silence. Then he laughed, quiet, bitter. "You always thought you were the good one. The quiet son, the loyal son. But let's not pretend you didn't benefit from every lie he told." My voice came out calm. "I didn't forge documents. I didn't rob a dying man." He leaned forward. "You don't know what I've done." I met his stare. "No, but I'm about to find out." And in that moment, I saw it. A flicker. Fear. Not of exposure, but of being outplayed. He stood abruptly. "You're making a mistake." "I'm just keeping a promise," I said. He paused at the door. Then, without turning, he said, "You should have stayed the weak one," and left. I locked the door behind him, then went straight to my desk, because this wasn't over. It was just beginning. The next few weeks were a blur of paper trails and cold phone calls. I wasn't trying to prove a crime, exactly. Not in the legal sense. I was trying to trace a pattern, a long invisible thread woven through our lives. And every document I found pulled it tighter. I started with the trust. The Monroe Trust, as the letter had called it, a discreet shell account, buried under layers of LLCs registered in Wyoming, Delaware, and finally, offshore. It took a private investigator to crack open the full picture. An old friend of Dad's, who owed him favors from way back when favors still meant something. What we uncovered wasn't just theft. It was premeditation. Years of it. David had been quietly siphoning money from Dad's holdings using proxy accounts. Not huge amounts, just enough to avoid scrutiny. He'd rerouted old insurance payouts, royalties from patents, even proceeds from the sale of the Vermont land that we were told had gone to taxes. He hadn't just waited for our father to die. He'd been feeding off him while he was still alive. And the trust originally created for Elliot, the brother I never knew, had become a holding pool for those stolen funds. David forged legal documents to present himself as the heir to that trust. A trust he never had the right to touch. But he didn't stop there. I found emails, dozens of them. Between David and a private appraiser. He was planning to liquidate a rare collection of artifacts Dad had kept locked away since the 80s. Historical bonds, military heirlooms, even a Civil War-era rifle once gifted to our great-grandfather. Items that weren't just valuable, they were sacred to our family history. The appraiser had already sent an offer. David was days away from finalizing the deal. And then came the final thread. I tracked down a man named Marcus Dwyer, former legal clerk at the firm where Dad used to practice. The kind of guy who disappears into records and dusty ledgers and rarely surfaces. I only found him because he'd written a blog post of all things, about ethical wills and moral legacies. I called. I didn't expect him to answer, but he did, and when I mentioned my father's name, there was a pause on the line that made my stomach turn. I remember him, Marcus said. He made me promise to store something, off the books. What was it? I didn't look. He insisted. Said it was to be kept sealed until a very specific condition was met. What condition? His death and the presentation of a handwritten code. My breath caught. A code. I opened the letter again, the one I'd found in the cabin. In the corner, scrawled so faintly I'd missed it before, was a series of numbers. February 19th, 82. ELJ3, 199I. Read it to Marcus. He went silent for a long time. Then said, I'll need a day. The next evening, he called. I found it. What is it? It's a signed confession. A sworn affidavit from your father, detailing everything David did. The forged signatures, the extortion, the blackmail. He was going to go to the authorities, but he changed his mind. Why? Because of you. I swallowed hard. Marcus continued. He said, and I quote, my other son has a heart like a steady hand. And that's what this legacy needs. Not justice, not vengeance, balance. My throat burned. The next day, I filed a motion through Keller to delay probate. Then I sent David a formal notice of inquiry demanding an audit of the estate, citing breach of fiduciary trust and evidence of asset misappropriation. No threats. No rage. Just paperwork. I didn't hear from him for 2 days. Then came the phone. Call. Late. Unlisted number. I let it ring 4 times before picking up. His voice was quiet. You did this. I didn't answer. You're going to destroy everything. No, I said. You already did. I'm just holding up the mirror. There was a long silence. Then, barely above a whisper, you think Dad loved you more? I closed my eyes. No. I think he loved us both. But he trusted me not to turn that love into a weapon. He hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, heart heavy with something more than victory. Regret. Not because I wished I hadn't done it, but because I'd waited so long, because for all the pain David caused. He wasn't born this way. He was shaped by something. By silence, by shame, by a father who kept too many secrets. And now, we were both just echoes of a legacy cracked down the middle. One of us tried to bury it, the other was finally digging it up. The day of the hearing, the sky was the same shade of gray as the stone steps of the courthouse. It wasn't raining, but it felt like it should have been. Everything in the air was heavy, thick with something unspoken. David showed up late. He walked in wearing the same smug detachment he always wore in moments like this: tailored suit, polished shoes, and that mask of indifference he'd perfected since we were kids. But underneath it, I could see it now, the cracks. He didn't look at me as he passed. Not directly. Just a quick glance, like he was checking for blood on the floor before stepping around it. The courtroom wasn't crowded, just lawyers, the judge, and the stillness between us. The kind of stillness that only comes when the people in the room already know what's been done. Keller presented the documents, the clause, the bank records, the affidavit from Marcus. He did it all without theatrics. No fire, no fury. Just truth, presented like glass clear, sharp, and impossible to ignore. David didn't say a word during the proceedings. Not one. Even when the judge asked if he had anything to say in his defense, he just shook his head, like he was all ready. Somewhere else. Like he knew the curtain had finally fallen. The verdict was swift. The clause stood. The inheritance was nullified. David forfeited all claims. The trust, the property, the estate, everything reverted to me. Not as reward, as responsibility. I left the courthouse alone. The cold hit different that day. Not biting, just honest. like it was washing something off me that I hadn't realized was clinging to my skin. That night, he came to the house. Not to fight. He didn't knock. Just stood at the end of the driveway, hands buried in his coat pockets. Like a boy waiting to be called home. I walked out. We stood in silence for what felt like years. Finally, he spoke. You did what he wanted. I nodded. I did. He looked up at the sky like it might give him permission to speak plainly. He always saw the worst in me. No, I said. He saw what you were capable of. You just proved him right. A bitter laugh escaped his throat. So what now? You get the house, the money, the clean conscience? No, I said. I get to bury a brother I can't mourn. And carry a family name that's now stained in ink and memory. His eyes darted to mine. There was something there, not hate, not even regret, just a hollowed-out grief. The kind that doesn't scream, it just settles. I never wanted the money, he muttered. Then why did you take it? He didn't answer right away. Then quietly, because I wanted to be seen. Just once, not as a shadow, not as the mistake, just seen. The words hit me harder than I expected. I didn't forgive him. I couldn't. Not for what he did. Not for what he chose. But for a moment, I understood. And that understanding broke something in both of us. I didn't say goodbye. He didn't ask for it. He just turned and walked into the dark, the sound of his footsteps fading into the night. Like a secret that no longer needed keeping. I stood there for a long time after, letting the cold remind me I was still here, still breathing, still carrying it all. A year passed. The estate was settled. The trust restructured. I used part of it to establish a scholarship in Elliot's name, my half-brother, the ghost I never got to know. A boy stolen by silence. I kept the cabin. Not to live in Dot, just to visit Dot, to remember who we were before the world split us apart. Sometimes I sit on the porch with a cup of black coffee, the kind Dad liked, bitter, grounding. I watch the trees shift in the wind, and I swear, some days I can almost hear his voice again. Some things are earned. He was right, and I finally earned the truth. Not all of it. Not the neat kind, but enough to begin again, with open eyes and a steady hand. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel. It really helps. Click the video on the screen, and I'll see you there.